Well, hello, everybody. Welcome. TJ here with Dead History. And I'm here with a very special guest today. I'm sure no surprise to many of you who have caught our live streams. And I'm sure Kurt's going to be giving me heck for it. Of course, not using a song that doesn't have copyright to it, but I had to use that song in the intro. It just was fitting. Tonight, very special guest, Kurt Deion. Kurt has his wonderful website that I've promoted for a long time, kurtshistoric.sites.com. And now the reason that Kurt's on with us tonight is because of his wonderful brand new book that is just being released here very soon. Presidential Grave Hunter. Oh, there it is. One kid's quest to visit the tombs of every president and vice president by author Kurt Deion. Kurt, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, TJ.
Absolutely. I've been very excited about this for a while. You first announced your book going to be coming out on our last Dead History Trivia night. So this has been months in anticipation here for many of us, including myself. And I'm just thrilled to have you here. And Kurt was very gracious. I actually received a copy of the book and was able to read it. I was just telling Kurt earlier, I'm actually halfway through reading it for my second time. So it is absolutely fabulous. Kurt, why don't you start off by telling us when exactly the book's official release date is and where people can get it before we get into the heart of this thing.
Sure thing, TJ. So the book's official release date is Tuesday, a few days from now, Tuesday, May 9th. If you've ordered a signed copy from me directly at presidentialgravehunter.com, your copy's probably already arrived to your residence or it's in the mail. And actually, I've seen photos or notifications from people who purchased it through other means such as Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or their local bookstore, independent bookstores, that their books have either already arrived or are arriving in the next day or so. So if you've already ordered it, you might not even be waiting till Tuesday, May 9th. But officially Tuesday, May 9th, and the book will be available in perpetuity at presidentialgravehunter.com if you want a signed copy. If you want an ebook version, that's an option too. I can't sign the ebook version. That'll harm your device. But.
Well, that's wonderful. And just so everyone knows, I know we'll have more people trickling in here shortly to join the live. We're going here at Dead History, we're going to be giving away a signed copy of Kurt's book tonight. We're going to do that by probably I'm going to take questions at the end, and we're going to pick who has the most clever and interesting question for Kurt. That'll probably end up being the winner, as well as I'm going to, and probably with the help of Kurt, going to select a few other participants or even people that just follow our Instagram accounts that Dead History is going to, on our behalf for Kurt, send out a few free copies to some of those people as well. So we're going to be giving away some of Kurt's books tonight, which will be a lot of fun. And I'm excited to get into this. So, of course, anybody that knows my channel knows my son, Henry. He's 9.5 years old now. And when I first met Kurt a while ago now, a couple years ago, I was fascinated to learn at the young age that Kurt started his trek of going and visiting all of these, or wanting to visit all of these presidential grave sites. And of course, through talking to you, Kurt, one-on-one, when we've met up and spent some time together, and then of course from reading the book, it all stemmed from a Scholastic Book Fair book that your mom purchased for you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that? What sparked all this at such a young age of 9, if I am not mistaken, correct?
So it came in a few stages. So I officially took up my quest to visit presidential grave sites, all of them at age 9. I visited my first president and first lady graves when I was 8, and I first got interested in the presidents themselves at age 7. So it was a bit of a progression. So it was February 2002, 21 years ago. Hard to believe, but right, it was the Scholastic Book Club's order for my mother bought me this very book right here, this exact copy, So You Want to Be President, authored by Judith St. George and illustrated by David Small. During this process, because in my book, Presidential Grave Hunter, I used a scan of this copy. I needed David Small's permission because he owns the copyright to the image. So I actually made email contact with David Small. So that was really great to be able to, and he was very enthusiastic. He was like all caps, like, yes, please use my book. This is awesome. And then the author, Judith St. George, she passed away in 2015. But in December, I visited her gravesite in New Jersey, the same cemetery as singer Whitney Houston, and brought the book to her grave. So, that's part of the thing with visiting gravesites is not always being able to meet the person or interact with them when they're actually alive. But this was as close as I was going to get and pay tribute to her for partially inspiring my presidential inspiration, was bring my copy of the book to her gravesite. So, and I was glad that David Small is still around and I was able to share the inspiration that he had on me, share that knowledge with him. But this book, it has a lot of funny illustrations. That's what got to me at age 7. So when the Roosevelts, the children brought up the different animals to make their sick sibling feel better, including the horse they brought up in the White House elevator. Things like that. Let's see if I can pull a couple that I didn't use last night in my live stream with Lisa of Historical USA. There's Franklin Pierce getting thrown from his horse. He earned the nickname Fainting Frank. There's another pretty good one of, see if I can find the one. I mentioned this last night but didn't show it, and it's also mentioned in the book in the prologue, talking about George Washington's pesky siblings, and it shows a bunch of his siblings, caricaturized, tugging on his wig and tie and all that. So those were the things that got me interested in presidents at age 7, were largely David Small's illustrations that accompanied Judith St. George's writing.
That's incredible. Yeah. So, I can see just by you showing us a few of those illustrations how that would captivate a young kid. Somebody who, I know you're a big reader and fan of comics and that sort of thing. So just those illustrations and having that vision in your head, I can see how that would captivate a young child. It's very, very cool. So now your mom gets you this book. You kind of, according to what you wrote in your own book, you kind of reluctantly picked it up and then you couldn't put it down. And this sparked really this interest in you to see these presidents. And you just said a few moments ago that, when you visit grave sites, you're not really obviously visiting them when they're alive. But I love how in your book, you mentioned how you met them and you would go to meet them. So why don't you speak to that? Like, as a young child, if you can think back to when you were 9 years old, 10 years old, was that the mindset you had? Was that kind of the way you depicted this as a young child? Like you were going to meet them, even though obviously you were visiting their grave sites at the time?
Yes, that's really how it's been. Because as I say in the prologue, I never had a chance to dine with John F. Kennedy or go on a stroll with Harry S. Truman or shake hands with Abraham Lincoln, but My mother and I ate dinner at the Union Oyster House in Boston, where Kennedy used to eat clam chowder. I've walked with my father through the neighborhood streets of Independence, Missouri, where Harry Truman used to take his walks. And I've put my hand on the railing, which is original and the only house that Abraham Lincoln ever owned. So being able to put my hand on that railing that he and First Lady Mary Lincoln used. So not just the grave sites, but going to these other places, being in their footsteps and seeing kind of what life would have been like for them. And then in the physical sense, going to their final resting place, because again, that in my mind shows that, again, they were a real person. They lived, they died. And this is where, in the physical sense, their story has concluded and they're being memorialized in this kind of final way. In this sense, of course, people's legacies go on and continue to be put forth and interpreted in different ways in books and programs and other things. But in that kind of sense, that's where they ended up physically, and that's kind of as close as you can get to meeting them in a variety of ways, I think.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I love how you put that, because a lot of people always ask me, of course, I did all these presidential grave sites and vice presidential grave sites in a very short amount of time, with the exception of one that you and I will touch on here in a little bit. But I was a 40-year-old man when I really started this. I probably saw my first presidential grave site. I was 13. So, you had me beat by a lot. But it's interesting because now, as I'm traveling around different parts of the country with my 9-year-old son, Henry, who he really loves to go see these presidential grave sites and see certain things. Now, he's definitely not as enthusiastic as you were at 9 years old about it, but he does really enjoy it. And I guess that's what also really spoke to me a bit about your book, is the fact that I can put myself not in your shoes, but in your parents' shoes, of being the
You could
parent.
be the zany boundary pushing father.
Yes,
like my father.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's funny because you reference a few times in the book about you guys dragging your sister along, kicking and screaming, not wanting to do these things, of course. Would she rather go visit graves or Disney World, is the one question your father asks her at one point. And that's the truth. I mean, most 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, they're going to Disney World on their vacations, but your parents were touring the country with you and visiting all these different grave sites, which it leads me to another thing. When you first, obviously, I know your father had seen a program on C-SPAN about the book Who's Buried in Grant's Tomb. Mm-hmm. And you're going to show us that book, of course. And
they're also very worn.
Yes, obviously. And your father obviously knows that you have this book. You're really enjoying this, and he brings this up to you, and first words out of your mouth are, "Well, can we do that?" And when you first said that to your parents, were they like, "Are you nuts, kid?" Or were they like, kind of, maybe we could do it? I mean, what was their initial reaction when you showed such a passion to go visit all of these presidential grave sites?
So we didn't have the book yet, to clarify.
Okay.
That was actually in the program, was when my dad first learned about the book.
Okay.
So again, it kind of snowballed. So again, interest in the presidents, then happened to go to a few sites that kind of coincided with their graves being right there. The Adamses,
Mm-hmm.
John F. Kennedy, and George Washington. And then my father stumbled upon this re-airing of this program, a book talk on Who's Buried in Grant's Tomb, told me about C-SPAN founder and CEO Brian Lamb going to all the presidential and vice presidential graves, except one that he couldn't get to. and him being inspired by historian Richard Norton Smith, who had been director of, I believe, 5 presidential libraries. Well, 4 to that point. I believe he was also the inaugural director of the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library in Springfield. So he told me about that. Then I looked up at him, age 9 at this point, and I said, "Can we do that and go to all the different presidential grave sites?" So, I mean, within a few minutes, he was on the internet looking at seeing where they all were. So I guess it didn't take too much convincing. I had puppy dog eyes, I guess. I don't know. So I don't remember my mother's initial reaction, but my parents have always been very supportive of me, and also my sister too. It took a bit longer for her to find what her interests were exactly, but they were always trying to be supportive of both of us. I was just more targeted and found that early on. And also, I would like to note that we did go to Disney World multiple times. So it wasn't like she never did anything she wanted. And my parents on these vacations did try to throw in, as we said, she loved and
Animals.
still very much loves dogs. So at one point, I was driving around in our city and in the little shopping area, Garden City, and she saw a dog. This was within the last 5-6 years or so, and got out of my car while I was still moving and left the door open to go pet somebody's dog. So fanatical about dogs, and she would always love if we would go on these trips if there were dogs in, say, Manhattan or something like that. So there were things that she did like, but man, did she hate seeing the presidents. It didn't really in her mind counteract it.
No, I understand. And I don't want to depict it like your parents are like, you're going to go to cemeteries and like it. It wasn't like that. But it is funny how you do point out in the book how your interests obviously were very different from your sisters. And it's very comical, some of the things that took place. One of the comical things that I found funny, and I don't think it's funny that he was injured, but the fact that right before one of your trips early on, your father decides that he's going to get a fumble, I believe it was. And he swears to this day that he recovered the fumble, I believe you say. And he broke his arm when you were planning on heading down to Washington, D.C. Correct? I have this timeline correct? This is before the D.C. trip?
Yeah, so this was June 2004. June 5th. Ronald Reagan passes away, age 93, in California. My parents sit me down and present to me the idea of going to see him lie in state in the Capitol Rotunda. We live 400 miles away in Rhode Island, so we'll be driving down there just like we had done the previous summer to see some of the different historical sites and monuments in the area. But then the next day, Sunday, June 6th, my dad goes and his arm gets landed on when he goes to recover a fumbled football. He always says he recovered the football. So also years later, still playing football, when he tore his rotator cuff, he did still make that catch too. So these are always very important, that he still finished the plays, and he walked away injured but successful. So he's most recently played a few weeks or months ago at age 63, playing with people in their 20s and teenagers. So he's playing with, he's most recently played with some people who he's older than their grandfather. So he's always been very passionate about playing football, and in this instance it was unexpectedly having an effect on us going to see President Reagan, because when he broke his arm, the cast was past his elbow. It was up to here. So it's one thing if it's, up your forearm, but past here, and you got to drive 400 miles.
That's tough.
It was going to be a bit onerous. And then I don't want to give too much away, but a lot of other situations came into play that stopped the trip from happening until it didn't. And then we ended up going down there, and he made the very long drive with one arm, basically, and at one point no arms. So, but I'll
It really is
brief,
incredible
but
that
I'll let people read that. But it's always been an adventure, and I think with the book, I think, not to toot my own horn, but I think that I hit a good combination of giving historical background, giving the personal interactions to the agency, to the different people in my family and what their thoughts were, what my perception was, and making it seem relatable, because again, I think we were regular people, and I had this weird, in a way, but cool quest, and how that interacted with our lives. And there are very, there could be somber moments and very special or solemn or dignified moments, and then sometimes you're keeled over in a booth in Canton, Ohio, laughing
Ohio.
hysterically past
Sleep
midnight,
deprived.
sleep
Yeah.
deprived, because the
Yeah.
ketchup bottle sounds like it's farting. So
It's-
this book can hit a lot of different chords, and I wrote it in a way that I think you don't have to have all this pre-existing knowledge to
Nope.
get into the book. I try to explain, oh, this is who this president was, and this is what this first lady did, and this is and things like that, and give background and context to help, so that people of all different areas of knowledge can come in and take something from the book. That was my goal.
Well, you did a brilliant job of that. And I'll tell you, one of the things I kind of touched on it when you and I were speaking before we came on live here tonight. One of the things that I actually found quite endearing is that realism that you bring to the book. You talk about, of course, the grave sites and some historical background and significance of the sites and this sort of thing, or the people, of course, buried there. But you speak about, even times of, financial hardships with your family, and where you're going to be able, as a young person, like you're thinking, like, am I even going to be able to go this year and see any of the other grave sites I want to see due to, some financial situations with your family. And it really, I found it almost, I don't know if you meant to do this, but I found it like you, in a way, you were writing a tribute to your parents, the sacrifice they made and the things that they did to really support you and help you achieve this goal that you had at such a young age. I found that to be really, really fascinating. And I did take that away. And I don't know if that was something that you thought of as you were writing. Obviously you're going to talk about the support your family gave you, but it was very, very endearing that I found that part of the book. And again, maybe I'm looking at it through the eyes of a parent who has a child now that we're traveling around. So, was that something that you thought of when you were writing the book about, the sacrifices that your parents were making to try to really help support you and keep this journey and this goal alive for you?
Certainly, that was something that was on my mind. Again, I was trying to capture kind of the whole story as best as I could, and I think that was definitely part of it. Again, there were times where real life, in a way, it got in the way. And as I said, there's paying bills and surviving is more important than going to see a president's house or a gravesite, as much as I obviously love doing that. And certainly as I got older, was more conscious and aware, as also some of the finances got tighter and whatnot. But it was it was interesting going back and reliving a lot of everything in my head. And there were some things at various points I asked other people about, like
Mhm.
my sister, what her thought was with a certain situation, so I could accurately put in the book what her thought was, and I tried to tell a complete and accurate story of how I got to these places to just make it seem more real for the people reading it, that's how it happened.
Yeah.
It was a tribute in a way, and it was just factually accurate
Yeah, of course.
too. So
Yeah, no, I picked up on it. It's well done. I love it. Now, so you start this journey. You're down in D.C. for Reagan's, you know, service, of course, when he died in 2004.
Mhm.
So now you embark on this big journey. Now, was there any point, if you could think back, because I know you've revisited a lot of these graves, just like myself now, over the last few years, I've gone and revisited a lot of these presidential graves and vice president graves. You know, as like a younger 9, 10, even 11-year-old kid, was there any graves that you were disappointed in, you know, at the time when you first visited them? Like, is there anything that where you were like, because I remember, you know, reading in, of course, early on in the book, you speak about your first visit to the Adams, you know, crypt, of course, the tomb there in Quincy, and how like it was literally like when you got on the trolley to go from the house, you know, over to the church and this sort of thing, or over to the house, the other house. It, you know, it was like getting on like a ride at Disney for you. Now,
Mhm.
was there ever a time over those younger years visiting for the first time where there was a little bit of disappointment in the either the grave or just the circumstances? Is there anything that sticks out in your mind that you might even have put in a book that you can touch on?
I can say that overall, I was just thrilled to be at the different sites, the grave sites. So because again, these were people who I was reading about in my various presidential books, or starting to watch maybe a few documentaries like that old History Channel series that went through all the presidents sometime around maybe 2004 or 5
Mm,
in there, and I was just thrilled to be kind of in their presence. And also, when you're that age, you're not necessarily thinking about, as I say, all the political ramifications, like kind of, you know, the grown-up stuff. You're not thinking
yeah,
about,
yeah,
oh, Reaganomics, or how the AIDS crisis was handled, or
yeah.
this war, or you know, Japanese internment, necessarily, you know, getting to be more aware of those things and becoming a more political person, you know, getting older and a more analytical person, not having all of those thoughts at age 9 or
Of
10. I
course.
mean, it more so it started with me with slavery, definitely. Certainly that was something that had already been on my mind,
Mhm.
especially I was very much, as I say in the book, very anti-Confederate, especially because,
Anti
you know,
John Tyler too.
yeah, and John Tyler, he
No,
renounced his U.S. citizenship to
yep.
side with the Confederacy in order to perpetuate the enslavement of
Mhm.
Black people. So he was low on my presidential list of visiting the graves. He does have a cool looking grave,
He does. Yeah.
but I was not happy with him. And as I say in the book, there was, you know, at that point I was, yeah, again, 8, 9 years old. I was more willing to, for lack of a better word in this situation, you know, like kind of be more lenient or forgive, you know, presidents like Washington or Jefferson.
Mhm,
But they're like,
mhm.
okay, this was a horrible, horrible thing they did. I would say I'm still glad at least they did some other good things.
Yeah.
Versus, as I say, when I went to in the same cemetery as John Tyler, uh, Confederate President Jefferson Davis. There's a picture I included in the book, and I'm like,
Scowling.
no, it's.
Yeah.
I said if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then this does all the talking for me, basically, about what I thought of Jefferson Davis. So I guess you bring up John Tyler in that sense. Then grave wise, if anything, I guess I'd have to say, I think the grave that was the lowest when you and I had a grave grading live stream. I think we both put Martin Van Buren in the F category.
Yeah.
And I mean, it fits for the little, Hudson Valley village that he's in at the time. And he wasn't a spectacular president or anything per se. So it's kind of fitting, but it's not very inspiring, the obelisk that's
No.
there. And my father, my sister, and I, we drove out the 3 hours there, got him. The house was closed, the Lindenwald, the Martin Van Buren
Lindenwold,
National
yep.
Historic Site. So we didn't go in. So we just went to Hinderhook for the grave on this gray, cloudy day, drove to Albany Rural Cemetery in Menands to get Arthur. It started raining, and then we drove the 3 hours back.
Yeah.
So, Olivia really hated that one.
Oh, I'm sure she did. I can't say I blame her really for that one though.
Yeah, so so she was 6, I was 9. I could kind of understand that situation, but so I would say those stick out there. Tyler for a very different reason,
Of course.
In my thinking at the time than Van Buren, but I still overall liked it all except John Tyler.
So now, of course, the right on the front cover of the book, it says, kids' quest for visiting all the presidents and vice presidents. There it is right there. So now, of course, this brings us to, mention here the vice presidents. Now, obviously, you mentioned in the book, you go visit at Crown Hill Cemetery in Indianapolis. You go visit Benjamin Harrison's grave. It's a kind of a rainy day, and you're in this cemetery, and you realize, well, you don't really have this quest to visit all the vice presidents at this current time, but there's 3 of them laid to rest right there in Crown Hill Cemetery in Indianapolis. So, of course, you and your father visit the 3 VPs that are buried there. Now, was it right then that you started to realize, well, if I'm in the general area and vicinity of a vice president, I should visit? Or when was a specific time that you said, well, I'm doing the presidents, I really should do all the vice presidents as well?
It was not then. It would have been cool, but I had a more myopic view at the time. So I was more so laser focused on the presidents, and even though I didn't mention them in the title per se, the first ladies too, because most of them, as I discussed with Lisa last night of Historical USA, most of the first ladies, especially the spouses, are buried next to the president. So visiting those 2 was my priorities over the vice presidents and anybody else. So when we were at that same cemetery, Crown Hill Cemetery, I took my father's picture at the grave of bank robber John Dillinger. So it's kind of proof in a way that I was there. I took the picture, at age 9, but at age 9, I didn't care about my picture with John Dillinger. I regret that. The next year, same thing at Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland. Got all sorts of pictures with James and Lucretia Garfield's memorial. I took my dad's picture at businessman John D. Rockefeller's grave. I couldn't be bothered. And but so vice presidents, no. So it was those 3 vice presidents you mentioned, Crown Hill Cemetery. Before that, by a few months, I'd also visited Aaron Burr at the Princeton Cemetery in Princeton, New Jersey, because he's in the same cemetery as Grover Cleveland and Francis Cleveland. But also visiting Aaron Burr was more so because, he shot Alexander Hamilton, the guy who's on the $10 bill. No musical at that point. So it was more they were in the area. And then it really started. So about 5 years after that, 2009, I was going to Kansas and Missouri with my father. It's kind of out there when you live in Rhode Island. I hadn't been out there before. Wasn't sure when I was going to get back. I still haven't been back yet. So glad that I was going down a list of other sites or graves to see in that general area, and I stopped at Vice President Charles Curtis, and I was thinking, when am I going to get out to Kansas again? And again, 14 years later, I haven't.
Yeah.
So that was a good call. And so then that kind of started from there. I got him because also I already had a bunch of the vice presidents, because you got to think vice presidents such as Thomas Jefferson,
Of
John
course.
Adams,
Yep.
Andrew Johnson, Millard Fillmore. They did double duty. They had been vice president, then they became president. So I kind of unintentionally already had a lot of vice presidents, and I was going to be getting a few more. Harry Truman on that very trip. Eventually, I was going to get Gerald Ford and Lyndon Johnson. So then it kind of, again, it snowballed, and then that's how you end up getting all these different graves, because they're like, oh, then Satchel Paige is by there, and then you have a friend named TJ who is like, oh, I'm going to all the Baseball Hall of Fame graves. So I was only getting kind of like the big name ones. I'm like, oh, there's a bunch of like dead ball era players buried in Massachusetts that I should get. And then again, like, oh, they're buried with this person, and that person was also a Supreme Court justice, and there's
It
7
just
of them buried
snowballs.
here. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I get that person. Like, wait, I already have 3 of the Andrew Johnson impeachment managers, and it's a gateway drug.
Yeah, it's true. It is. It's since I started this only about 3 years ago, this hobby of visiting graves, it is. It's just you get into one thing, and then all of a sudden you realize you already have a few in another category, and then it just kind of snowballs from there. Now,
I'd like to just throw in too is that, again, our main interests are the presidents, but again, we've branched out, and as I say in the book, not as I've learned and just getting out there in the public history world, being part of different institutions, and also taking the courses that I did, really realizing that they were people of, eventually, most of them, people of means, or at least political influence, who had the opportunity to have their stories preserved, or the people had the interest in doing it, but there's other people who might not have had that ability, so their stories aren't as well known. And I'm also, it's part of educating myself and branching out. Of course, Baseball Hall of Famers doesn't necessarily fit exactly what I'm trying to say, but some people whose stories are kind of overshadowed in history, and teaching myself a bit more and broadening out, and trying to also inspire people through the book, and saying that you want to go to presidential sites, but maybe that doesn't interest you, but you would love to go to places related to LGBTQIA history. You want to go to this gay actress's grave, or the Stonewall Inn, or this gay actor's house, or something where it used to be, or this was civil rights, the walk the Pettus Bridge in Selma, or you want to go to John Lewis's grave, or Fannie Lou Hamer, or maybe it's somebody that I haven't even heard of and I can't bring up, but you think that they have an interesting, important story. So that's what I'm trying to get people to do too, is like find their thing.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
but I'm also trying to, having run out of President Graves, trying to at least broaden my knowledge and not be so, insulated.
Yeah, of
And,
course. Yeah.
Obviously love the presidential history, but, some of them did some things that I definitely don't agree with. And, they're not always the best people per se. But yeah, so that's kind of my rambling, branching out
Yeah, no,
story about
it
that.
it does. You do branch out, because I mean I've done the same thing, obviously. Now you mentioned in the book that when you were in Buffalo, you visit Millard Fillmore's grave, and you stumble across, at that particular moment in time, you're the most awesome, best grave, most coolest grave you've ever seen.
Hmm.
And is it the Blocker or Bloucher? How is it pronounced? Do you know?
Bloker,
Blocher.
like poker.
Okay, so the Blocher family gravesite, which is in the same cemetery as President Millard Fillmore in Buffalo, you come across this magnificent, which you turned me on to after we had met and everything, and I obviously visited there and saw that. And then, it's this elaborate, just amazing, monument that this family has there. And there's a very interesting backstory that you explain, of course, in the book. But then, not too long after that, you visit a presidential gravesite that just trumps that as your favorite. And that is President James Garfield's monument there in Tomb in Cleveland, Ohio. Now, is Garfield still your favorite presidential gravesite to this day? That's my question.
Yeah, so 18 years after my one and only visit thus far, it's still atop any gravesite I visited. It's just so intricate, massive, 180 feet tall. There's different levels. There's terracotta sculptures, gargoyles, chandelier, mosaics, stained glass windows. I get the caskets just laid out there, not entombed in a sarcophagus or even a wall of vaults like
and
William and Anna Harrison. It's just
some young children get to actually go stand next to it.
Yeah, some young children with puppy dog eyes and tenacious fathers. So,
hey,
that's discussed in the book, and if I recall correctly, that was definitely a photo that we thought that has to be included in the book as well. So the Garfield's caskets, you can see them through these iron bars, but the gate is typically locked. So my father and I in June 2005 asked to be let in, and the keys weren't working. The gentleman said that he thought he had the key, and then it's got to be on this other ring upstairs. And it was like in a cartoon where somebody comes out with the 87 different keys. That was for real, and we have it on video. And I think at some point I'm going to go back and upload some more of these home movies to my YouTube channel, which is just Kurt Deion. And so that people can see some of how I pulled some of the exact lines of dialogue from the videos to use in the book, which again just helped it be more real. I wasn't approximating conversations. I was pulling exact conversations and, interpreting faces and everything like that. But eventually we did get inside that locked Garfield area to get a photo that to that point I had not seen anybody else have. And I can't off the top of my head think of any other grave hunters who have since, that I have crossed paths with.
I don't know anybody who's been let in. So, I mean, it's pretty remarkable. Now, before we talk about the other very big notch in your belt of people who are not ever allowed in or haven't visited a certain grave, we're going to speak about that here. But one of the stories you kind of just reminded me when you were talking about the home movies and, the dialogue that you got and you put in the book. One of my favorite stories in the book is when you guys went to Louisville and your father went to a local KFC and asked one of the teenage Kentucky Fried Chicken workers where Colonel Sanders was buried. That is probably one of my favorite stories in the entire book, because having met your father a couple of times and just, being around him, I can literally picture him like just asking this like 17-year-old who's making like $10 an hour, like, hey, where is Colonel Sanders buried? And how old were you at the time when your father approached this KFC worker to ask this question?
I was 9. He would have been 44. So close to your age. So see, the age gap between me and my father and you and Henry is pretty much right
on.
there overall.
Yeah.
So now you have your chance to go back down and do the same thing. I know you know where he is now, but
Yes.
if you want to follow in our footsteps more closely. But my dad will always, as they say now, commit to the bit. So and oftentimes he'll do things for his own amusement as well. So obviously, I don't think he necessarily genuinely thought that the minimum wage KFC worker was going to
I mean,
no,
that's
and
the place to ask, I guess, right?
but yeah, so but it was but we literally we went into the restaurant, waited in line, and then he asked.
It's great. It's great because you can just picture it happening, and this kid like behind the counter being like, "What?"
Yeah, there's a and this also ties into chicken. There's a popular restaurant up here in Rhode Island. It's in Burrillville, Wright's Chicken Farm, and it's a lot of like all you can eat with chicken, baked French fries, which are really good, pasta, stuff like that. And it's just this sprawling building and complex where it's like I couldn't tell you how many people they can fit in this restaurant at one time. It's insane. So there, it just keeps going and going, and you go to the back, and there's this big hall, and there's a stage on there, and I believe it was for my sister's high school graduation, like family party. We were there, and my little cousin had made some joke about somebody going up on the stage and doing the chicken dance or something, and my dad's like, I'll do it. You know who you're talking to? Which was based off of this Jim Rome interview with Evel Knievel from back in the day. So in front of, total strangers, my dad just goes up on the stage. He's not supposed to be on, and he does the chicken dance across it. So my dad'll do, my dad'll do almost anything. So
that's great.
We would do a lot more when he was younger.
Yeah, of course.
I
love it.
If it's funny, especially if he thinks it's funny, he's probably gonna do it.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So now that brings me to a grave that, listen, I've seen them all except this one. So you are the only one that I know of, and I'm pretty sure the only one that you yourself knows of that has visited the gravesite of Vice President Nelson Rockefeller. Now, he is buried on the Rockefeller family estate, right up in the Sleepy Hollow, New York area. And it's interesting, the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, which is obviously a public cemetery, the grounds of the Rockefeller estate, they literally touch up against the cemetery grounds, but there's no way to get in because there's these giant fences and these chain link fences, and right behind the chain link fence there's a wooden fence. So I mean, even if you
flat wooden fence, if you had gotten in there, so you couldn't get out.
Exactly. So it's built so no one will try to climb the fence. Now, of course, myself, I want to visit this grave so badly. I've tried for months to think of ways. How can I get over it? How can I do this? Maybe I'll just take the 9-year-old Henry and toss him over, tell him to go and explore and find it and come back. But obviously, I'm sure I'm never going to see it in person. The only pictures I've ever seen are, of course, the grainy ones from the actual burial and funeral back in the late 70s, I believe it was, correct?
Yeah, he died in 1979. So shortly thereafter that, there were some photos that appeared in a few like New York newspapers. But other than that, the photos I've seen are those, and then my own, and the one that my dad took as recon.
Yes. Now, and just so everyone is aware, I mean, Kurt and I have talked about this in other live streams and such, but this grave is not even something. There's been people, and you can speak to this, Kurt, somebody that obviously you spoke to when you were doing your C-SPAN interview and that sort of thing, that they've attempted to contact the Rockefellers and ask for permission to come visit this grave and have been turned down. I know of several accounts of people trying that avenue over the years, and to no avail. So obviously, Kurt didn't write a letter and get granted permission to go on. So Kurt, why don't you touch on how in the heck did you ever make it on to Nelson Rockefeller's the property there, the Rockefeller property, to visit his gravesite there?
Well, as I told Representative Paul Ryan when I met him back in 2015, it was because of a connection. And it was that a tree connected with the fence is what I didn't tell him. But so also to clarify, so my father also went to Rockefeller's grave. He took the picture for me, but just through circumstances, he happened to not go to Vice President Henry Wilson's grave in Natick, Massachusetts, and then then he decided to never go there to make sure that I had, for however long, a title. But so you mentioned Brian. Well, you talked about people who couldn't get in, so I'll bring up Brian Lamb, one of my inspirations, CEO and now former CEO and founder of C-SPAN. He was eventually a Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient. I think he got his in 2007, like right alongside like author Harper Lee. And, so just so the caliber of people that he was with. And so he got awarded by George W. Bush. But so he had written to Vice President Rockefeller's widow, Marguerite Happy Rockefeller is her nickname. So he wrote to Happy Rockefeller, and again, this is the founder of C-SPAN, highly, prestigious, well-respected gentleman, and involved in, at least interviewing and getting people aware of DC politics. And she said, yeah, sorry, no. And then for a while, there was a website of a very prolific grave hunter named Mike Reed. It was the Cemetery Project. The website's probably been down for at least a decade now, but I remember it's just a black background, and that was the first one I'd seen where somebody had gone to, just a ton of graves, different variety, and he had a picture, I believe, of the gate to the cemetery from the road, and it was there that he was stopped by either security or local police, actually, for just even being near the gate. Like, no, you have to move along.
Yeah.
And then there's another grave hunter who I've had the pleasure to meet, Pat Weissend. Yep. And he's out in New York, but more upstate, closer to Rochester and Buffalo. And he had been down there, and he went in the wintertime, and he was trying to see if he could see, even with the leaves down, if he could see it over the fence, because there's a book that was titled something like The Great Graves of Upstate New York.
Yeah.
That's not really that upstate. People disagree about that, I guess. But so he said, oh, you can see it from the Chrysler mausoleum, Walter Chrysler of automobiles. There's a lot of notable people buried in the public Sleepy Hollow cemetery. But he went and he couldn't see anything, even kind of like held his camera over the fence. And he has a video that he put up on YouTube back like 15 years ago. And it's just leaves and snow and everything. And you can see with the fences that it just wasn't gonna happen. So those
I've seen the photo. Yep.
Yeah. And then my father, so we didn't write to Mrs. Rockefeller, but my father got in touch with the office of Senator Jay Rockefeller, his nephew. He was senator from West Virginia. Joe Manchin is now in his Senate seat. And so again, this is 2010. And my father got turfed over to a family representative at Rockefeller Plaza in New York, and they also declined. And for my dad telling him that, oh no, a certain objective or project can't be accomplished is a big driver for him to ensure that at all costs that thing gets accomplished.
Yeah.
So I, being more reserved and passive, I was like, okay, well, nobody else can get Nelson Rockefeller. I guess we're not getting Nelson Rockefeller. And he said, we are getting Nelson Rockefeller. So then my dad's cousin, her husband's father passed away and the wake was in Western Connecticut. So it was most of the way from our Rhode Island home to Sleepy Hollow. And so he, attended the services. And then afterward, he went to Sleepy Hollow Cemetery to kind of scout things out. Was stuff viewable from the Chrysler tomb? And he went, and he couldn't see anything there, but there were also workers there doing some kind of construction, renovation, landscaping sort of project. So he had to move further down, and that is where he discovered in the farthest reaches of the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery that a gigantic, humongous, ginormous tree had fallen and crushed the chain link fence that was separating the two properties. This was a point where the wooden fence had stopped for a little bit, and this happened to be the precise spot where this giant tree fell. My dad kind of rushed in, was trying to look around because there had been no access by other people, so there was no guidance on, in this cemetery, this is where Nelson Rockefeller is. So he had to search around for a bit, trying to not get caught. Then he eventually found it, snapped a picture, got back over, came back to Rhode Island, showed the picture to me, and said, well, we're going to have to get you there soon because the Rockefellers, even though over time and generations, the money, dissipates, more as it gets spread out among the descendants, whoever's in charge, there's still going to be enough money to deal with this tree. But of course didn't want me to miss school either. So he's like, we'll take you next Saturday. So sure enough, we go the next Saturday. The tree had already started to be limbed, and chopped up, but I'll leave more of the other details of what happens in actually me going over and getting the grave and getting back out. I'll leave that to the readers to discover. But, right, so we went in, and I got Nelson Rockefeller, and then overall I really kept it under my hat for 3 years until the statute of limitations was up. But
I love it. I mean,
as Joe Fakosh said in his review, light trespassing.
Light.
It wasn't. Nothing was. There was no malicious intent.
No.
And I was like, as I say in the book, I definitely had cognitive dissonance going back and forth of the 3 hours there. I'm like, am I really gonna do this? I was 15 at the time. I was like, so. But it's been interesting, and Brian, it certainly got Brian Lamb's attention. And when I met with him in advance of the C-SPAN interview, it was the meeting where he decided he wanted to put me on his Q&A program. It was one of the first things he did. We sat down, and he's like, "How did you do it?" and I was like, "Well, it wasn't the most, it wasn't the best way." And then he's like, Mrs. Rockefeller's dead now. It's like, you're not going to hurt her.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, no, it's incredible. You're the only one that I know of. So my hat's off to you. My last question, because we do have a couple of, subscriber questions here. Last thing I want to touch on is, of course, you go through this journey, throughout your young age. And then you finally, I believe you were 19 years old when you completed the journey. Am I correct on that? 19?
Yeah, it's easy for me to remember. 19 and 123 days when I got Vice President Hubert Humphrey.
Yeah, Hubert Humphrey. Now, your last presidential grave was Lyndon B. Johnson. Now, my final presidential grave was Richard Nixon. And I remember
I would like asterisk still on Harry Truman.
Here we go about
every
Truman.
Time. No, we got to get you back out there so you can see it with your own eyes.
Oh,
no.
Boo! But either way,
all
the
right,
last.
no, context for people who don't know. So Harry Truman's is in the courtyard of his library because TJ went when COVID was kind of at its peak, but being very safe and isolating everything. But he couldn't go into the building to go into the courtyard. So he's counting Truman. I say he didn't see it with his own eyes. I gotta give him an asterisk on that one.
He's giving me. He's doing the Ford Frick. I'm
Frick,
Roger Maris apparently,
Yeah.
and I have the asterisk. But either way, even if you want to say that, my last grave that I visited presidential wise was Nixon, and I remember walking up to Nixon. I felt this like I couldn't believe that I had done this. And I can only imagine you starting at such a young age, and then 10 years later, or so, 19 years old, you finish this. What did you feel like when you were visiting and walking up to the LBJ family cemetery there on his ranch in Texas? What was the feeling like? Well, were you just elated? Were you relieved? Was there any emotion that came over you? Like, what was the feeling for you?
I was really hoping I wasn't going to get shot by a park ranger because as I say in the book a lot, and as you might have been able to gather from our dialogue here, I really try to get as close to the grave as possible so I can take the picture so you can see the inscriptions, as well as possible. If you're viewing it on my website or whatnot, or so also I'm as close to, physically as the remains, again, kind of meeting them. And, if they're 30 feet away or separated by a building like the Truman Library, it's not as cool. So in my perspective, I was got to bust his chops. So we went over the wall there in Stonewall, Texas at the LBJ Ranch, and I don't want to give away too much, but it didn't exactly go down how my dad and I envisioned for all those years the last presidential grave going. So we didn't get shot. That was good. But there was some running involved. There was some running and some yelling, and it was, again, nothing was done with, nothing we ever done with malice. We're trying to, we try to go the most respectable, above board ways possible. And then my dad also tries to take into evaluation, okay, what did the person who cite this is like, what was their personality like? So it's like, oh, did Lyndon Johnson, I know it's his property, but it's like, oh, did he relieve himself in front of somebody at a tree right by the cemetery where his parents are buried? Okay, you know what? Then maybe he wouldn't have had, the worst fit in the world if we hopped a fence for, 2 minutes for a picture.
And to just to touch on briefly, Kurt's not the only one here. Like I do the same things that Kurt does. At the LBJ family cemetery that Kurt's speaking of, it's a very low stone wall. So yeah, you're not supposed to, of course, hop the wall, but yeah, Kurt's not the only one that's done that. So
the one I don't have is, I don't have a story of basically going through, like I was doing, army training under barbed wire, ripping my hoodie.
I kid you not. At FDR in Hyde Park, first time I ever visited there, it's COVID. Nothing's open. The whole grounds are closed. The fence to get into the Rose Garden where FDR and Eleanor are is locked. But I can see there's a lot of give to the fence, so I crawl underneath, and I still have the hoodie to this day that has a hole in it where the fence caught. I'm army crawling to go see FDR. But hey, I visited FDR in Fala, and I was happy about it. So
our mutual friend Mel, who wrote a lot of those very challenging questions that stumped all of us in the last Dead History trivia segment, he told me he's actually had a gun pulled on him visiting cemetery. So
wow,
he's encountered in his journey some racism going
Oh,
to
geez. That's terrible.
certain places. So right. So in a way, we're fortunate that we
We
have
are.
some of the more, you know, lucky, kind of like haha stories. But it can, and he wasn't doing anything, boundary pushing like we were. He was just living his life. So there,
Yeah.
every time you go on a historical adventure to a different museum or road trip to a cemetery, you never quite know what you're going to
Oh,
encounter.
no. It's
And
true.
you know hopefully that never happens to Mel again or
No,
any of
or
us. But
anybody. No, absolutely.
so that's
Terrible.
going to
But
really sell the book here. It's like, hey, you could have a gun pulled on you, but it's also the United States, so it could happen.
yeah, unfortunately. Um, but yeah, I mean, the book is wonderful. We're going to end here with a few questions from the audience, but I just want to say, and I mean this sincerely, Kurt and I are friends, and I'm not just saying this because he's a friend of mine. This book is excellent. Anyone that likes history or just kind of like some real life, fun, adventurous kind of stories, or anyone that has any sort of presidential interest, pick up this book. I mean it sincerely. I'm not just saying that. It is awesome. Before we end tonight, I'm going to have Kurt, tell you all the rundown of where you can purchase it, all his stuff, his social media, all that stuff. So make sure you follow Kurt. Make sure you go pick this book up because it truly is phenomenal. We didn't even get into it here tonight, but one of the last things in this book is something near and dear to my heart about Kurt, who actually spent time and visited James Lavelle, who was the very famous officer who was photographed next to Lee Harvey Oswald when Oswald was shot and killed by Jack Ruby in 1963. There you go, right there. There's the infamous picture of Kurt reenacting that shot with Mr. Lavelle. So right there in the bottom left. It's awesome. It's so cool, the story about how he went and visited Jim Lavelle, and it's again, I'm a big Kennedy guy. My dad was a big Kennedy guy, so it's very, very cool. So you don't just get the presidential stuff and the history of some of these cemeteries and grave sites. You do get a very cool real life story of a kid who had this really awesome passion and this really awesome interest and hobby that turned. It's funny because you say, in the beginning of the book, your mom, bought a book that ended up being like just a springboard for what you would end up being passionate about and what you would end up, doing for the rest of your life, which is really, really, really awesome. I love it. I recommend it to anyone. I'm excited to give away a few copies of it. I truly am, because I want people to read this book. So I want to say, let's see, we got a few. This is a real good one. Andy asked me. So
well, I should say one thing too, because you said, if you were going to base off of who had the most interesting question as far as the book, it should be kind of like blind where, well, I mean, if I'm picking it, or are we?
So I'm going to read you. There's a few questions, okay, and I want you at the end to tell me what you found to be the most interesting question, and we'll pick from that.
Okay, so then I'll say don't say who said what. So
okay, no problem. No problem.
If that's Andy the lawyer from Scofflaws.
No, it's not. It's not.
Oh, okay.
It is not. But okay,
I was gonna say, because then I would definitely make sure he does not get.
Yeah, no, of course, no. He's got to pay double. So, so here you go. The question is: you've met famous people during your 18-year journey. Who that you've met in life has actually passed away, and you have been or you plan to visit their grave?
That is a very interesting question. So a few people I've met that were really important to me. So they've been cremated, actually. So, but that's part of, if you have the opportunity to go see somebody perform or meet somebody, go do it, while you can. So a famous anecdote in my family is back in April 1977. My dad was 17. He and 3 other people waited overnight. You know where this is going. And got tickets to see Elvis Presley and sold them for a profit. And my dad said, well, Elvis will be back here, Rhode Island sometime. And then 4 months later, Elvis was dead. So, can't go see their graves because they've been cremated, as far as we can tell, and ashes either privately kept or scattered. But Stan Lee, I met actually exactly to the day 2 years before he died. I met him, so I have a photo of me with Stan Lee and wearing a Spider-Man shirt. Stan Lee, co-creator of so many Marvel characters from the 1960s. One that was very, very important to me, will always be a top 10, maybe even top 5 moment of my life. Back in 2015, I met Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman, from in so many forms of media, going back to 1992 until he just passed away in November of last year after a very short illness. And he was just so friendly and great and everything. And then also I met Adam West a couple times, including most recently 3 months before he died. And he was also cremated. So there's some where some of the most important ones, as far as that I've met and have since passed, don't have graves to visit. So, but ones that have passed that I have met that do have graves that I have visited, I think I've met. I don't remember it because I was like a toddler, but I met John Pastore, who was a longtime Rhode Island senator. So I think I met him at a restaurant in Johnston at one point, and he like shook my tiny hand or something. And he's buried right by my great grandparents in St. Anne's Cemetery in Cranston here. So I met Jerry Remy, Boston Red Sox second baseman, and then announcer on NESN for about 30 years. I met him in summer 2019, and then he had for quite a number of years a lot of recurrences of cancer that he kept fighting and beating, and then eventually did not, and he passed away October 2021. And I visited his gravesite in I believe it's Weston, Massachusetts, a few months later, and I got my picture with him at a book signing. And I wore the same shirt that I wore to the book signing, I wore to his gravesite.
I remember you and I were texting that day when you went and visited his grave. Yeah.
Trying to think who else there was. I had and she was very, and I don't. Notorious has a bad connotation, so it wasn't a bad connotation, but like a notable kind of like everybody knew her. A substitute teacher in middle school, Clara Lamore Walker, and she was an Olympic swimmer. She participated in the 1948 Olympics in London, and she didn't medal, but then she got away from swimming for decades until she got older, and then she got back into it to help with a back injury, I believe, and then she went on to break so many like senior Olympics records, for senior citizens and whatnot. Yeah. So when she passed away a couple years ago in her 90s, she actually got a write-up on ESPN.
Wow.
This was somebody who, something happened where my mother remembers. I relayed it to her where she told me that like, oh, your mother raised you right, or whatever. Or she was, and she was a very religious person too. So, but if you sat, if you didn't sit with your feet squarely on the floor, she would tell you that, if you had like your knee on your chair, at your desk at the middle school, she would say, this is not a church, mosque, or synagogue, so it was kind of like I guess, she was kind of like a cult figure in our middle school, but also she was an Olympic swimmer who,
That's
again,
so cool.
I'm not going to have another substitute teacher who gets a write-up on ESPN when they pass away.
No, that's interesting.
So she's buried here in Cranston, and then I think there's one more, and I can't remember off the top of my head. So
it's great. It's a great answer. Yeah. I love it. Another one is, which first lady's graves has Kurt not visited?
So I crossed one off my list just last month. So when I first visited Gerald Ford's grave in Grand Rapids, Michigan, it was April 2010, and Betty Ford was still alive. So I didn't get her until last month. My father and I, after a whirlwind California trip, got back home, rested for about 4 days, and drove out to Michigan to attend the book launch of one of my presidential inspirations, historian Richard Norton Smith. He's been working for about a decade on a book, An Ordinary Man, about Gerald Ford, and the launch was at the Ford Museum. So went, met him, gave him the very first copy of the book that was given out to anybody. Was I hand delivered it to Richard Norton Smith.
That's awesome.
There at the Ford Museum. And when in doing so, also paid my respects to Betty Ford. So crossed her off my list. So if we're talking about presidential spouses who were first ladies, I believe I'm left with just two. Ellen Wilson is in, I believe, Rome, Georgia.
Rome.
She's not interred with Woodrow Wilson or the second Mrs. Wilson, Edith Wilson, not with them at the National Cathedral in D.C. And so same situation as Ford. When I visited Ronald Reagan in 2008, Nancy Reagan was still alive. She passed away in March 2016. And I hadn't been out to California since 2008 until just about a month ago. But when my dad and I went out there, we were hitting a bunch of the cemeteries like Hollywood Forever, San Fernando, Mission, a cemetery, ones where there were a lot of celebrities and famous graves and figures that we could get at once. So I didn't go back to just ostensibly get Mrs. Reagan I mean, we would have, of course, loved to go through and, reevaluate the current exhibit lineup there at the library as well. But I said, you know what, maybe if I play my cards right, I can be invited there as a guest speaker for Presidential Grave Hunter. So
there you go.
So Nancy Reagan don't have either. Then there's a few, presidential relatives or connections who stepped in to play the role of hostess or first lady when a president's spouse had either passed away or was incapacitated or opted not to do so. So I have a few. I discussed with Lisa last night. I do have Harriet Lane, James Buchanan's niece. I have John Tyler's daughter-in-law, Priscilla, who's buried in Montgomery, Alabama. I do have Emily Donaldson, who's buried near the Hermitage property or at the edge of it, not in that same cemetery as Andrew Jackson exactly. But I do have her. I don't have, the one that sticks out to me is Rose Cleveland, Grover Cleveland's sister, who filled the role before he married Frances Folsom, and she is buried over in Italy. So I don't have her. I do have Mary Arthur McElroy, who was Chester Arthur's sister. She stepped in there for a bit. His wife Ellen had passed away. Alrighty. So the one that jumps out to me, so I don't have Ellen Wilson, I don't have Nancy Reagan, and then spreading out, I don't have Rose Cleveland. I'm sure there's some others in there. But overall, I've got the overwhelming majority of them. Most of them are buried with the presidents. And then I even did get last year, I went out of my way a little bit to get Letitia Tyler, John Tyler's first wife, is not buried with him, and his second wife, Julia, Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond. She's about maybe 30 miles away. So I did go and finally get her last year. So I was glad to do that.
Yes. I remember you and I discussing that. Now, I'm going to break this down just to a very specific question. If you were to go overseas and visit the UK, give me the one grave that's the top of your list to visit over there.
That is tough. I do, it's a much smaller list, but I have, in case at some point I venture out from the United States, but I have been, accumulated a little list of some non-US graves I'd like to see. Two that jump out to me, and I know I'll have to pick one. Um, Two that are jumping out to me right now are Winston Churchill
Yep.
and Boris Karloff.
Oh, that's a great one.
So Churchill has a more interesting grave, though. Karloff is more like it's just a little plaque in the like a marker that's on a stake in the ground in the little garden where he was laid to rest. So it's not the grave itself not being exactly dynamic in that
Yeah.
sense. I guess so. UK grave, I will go with Winston Churchill.
You can't beat it. I love it.
If
Good one.
if we're going anywhere else in the world, it'd be Monaco and Grace Kelly. But UK, I'll go with Winston Churchill.
Very good. Somebody wrote that they're reading about James Madison currently. Any thoughts about his burial site? And of course, Henry and I were just there about 2 weeks ago. His wonderful, beautiful estate there at Montpelier. Any thoughts on the burial site and his home there?
Well, it's kind of a couple interesting anecdotes. So I went with my family. It was July 12th, 2005, because I remember the exact dates because I'm kind of weird. But so we went, and at that point, the mansion where the Madisons lived was undergoing heavy renovations at that time because after it had left the Madison family hands, it had changed a bit, the interior and the exterior, especially. At one point, it turned into this kind of like pink stucco look, and then so they removed all that, returned it to the brick exterior that it has now. And so when we first went in there in 2005, it was basically you were almost going into a newly constructed house almost. So like a couple years before, my grandparents were having a house built, and you go in and you see, oh, here's kind of like just the raw boards and everything around. So that was my first experience in the Montpelier mansion there. Then the grave, it's a small cemetery there, quaint. He didn't have a monument for a few years. It was kind of basically crowdfunded or crowdsourced to get the funds for it. And it just says Madison and his birth date and death date. So it doesn't even say James or president.
Yeah, no, it's nothing spectacular.
Anything. But it's interesting. And of course, when you go to certain presidential graves like that, there's going to be the dynamic of, okay, this was the Madison family cemetery, but then there's the folks who were enslaved by the Madisons or the Washingtons or the Jacksons, the Jeffersons. And so that's always on my mind there too, where it's like, okay, this is the situation that they ended up in, and this is the situation they ended up in here. And generally with the enslaved individuals, their graves are not marked. So that's something that's always on my mind. And the second anecdote with that quickly is I was going to so that day I'd gone to Montpelier and then also Monticello. They're not too far away. Jefferson's house and Madison's house. And then as I'm driving there to go my second time, about 10 years later, all of a sudden it's clicking in my head as I'm driving up the Montpelier driveway that it is July 12th, 2015. And I'm like, it is exactly 10 years to the day that I was here. So that made so I had people take my picture so I could do the side by side. Exactly 10 years. I got to the day, the Madisons and Jefferson. And so that was a bit interesting to see. So with the estate, the mansion, I got to see, again, to the day, exactly what 10 years of progress had brought to the restoration of
That
the
is cool.
Montpelier estate, and it had come a long ways. It still wasn't entirely done as far as dealing with some of the furnishings, but
Yeah.
now that was 8 years ago now. So I guess in 2 years I'll be up for another visit.
Yeah. Henry and I just did the tour at Montpelier. It's all done, and it's pretty spectacular. I of course got chased by bees when I was going from the Madison Family Cemetery over to the enslaved person cemetery over there on Montpelier property. So things I'll never forget, that's for sure. How old were you when you memorized all the presidents in order?
I guess probably 7 when I started. So,
Pretty incredible.
yeah.
Have you visited all 50 states?
No, I'm sitting at, I believe, 32. So, and Louisiana was just my dad and I, we were down in the Beaumont, Texas area, down by the border to visit the Big
Big
Bopper
Bopper.
musician. And we were that close to Louisiana. Neither of us had been. So we're like, all right, we got to go over the line and, get that. So Louisiana, we were, if we had been struck by an asteroid there, our death certificates would have said died in Louisiana. So we were there, but it was ever so briefly.
Yes.
So I'm at 32. I think the closest state to me in Rhode Island that I've not been to yet is Mississippi. So it's a lot of those Western states, and I haven't been to Alaska or Hawaii either. But
yeah, I haven't been to Alaska or Hawaii. I'm at 46. Alaska, Hawaii, I have never been, and the only two in the lower 48 are Nebraska and Nevada. I mean, that's it. But I got to go to Nebraska because
Grover Cleveland Alexander
is there. Yes, he is.
So, I hear he's the most average Hall of Famer.
He is. He's just like the president himself. Last question here. When, I'm going to go with when you write a second book, what is it going to be about, my friend?
Ooh, I don't know exactly. What I will say is that there were stories that hit the cutting room floor. There was a point where I had my whole write-up of how I met Paul Ryan. It was 2015. I was an intern with the U.S. Capitol Historical Society. Of course, he had been Mitt Romney's vice presidential running mate in the 2012 election against Obama and Biden. So that was an interesting encounter. That didn't make it into the book. Lisa asked me last night, when did I start officially? I can't remember if this was before our discussion on camera or when we were on camera, but she asked me when I officially started the book, and I said it was July 2016. It was the night that Hillary Clinton officially got the nomination, or she had officially accumulated enough of the delegates to get the nomination. And I was thinking, well, this could possibly be the first woman president of the United States, and I had met her 2 years prior, and that was an interesting story too. And that's what inspired me to, people have been telling me for years I should write a book. So I just started writing the first few sentences, and then the story of me meeting her didn't make the book. I reference it in the epilogue that I struggled to determine what to cut out, like me making Hillary Clinton gasp in front of TV cameras, news cameras, so leaving people a little bit of a teaser there. So I guess I would have to say there were other stories that I could have included, including there were things that happened on some of these trips that I cut out, a few graves here or there, or other stories. I could have talked about how an officer let my father and me into Lee Harvey Oswald's cell. And so at that point in time in 2012, that whole area of the Dallas Municipal Building where Oswald was held, interrogated, it was really deteriorated, and that was going to be gutted. So we thought like, oh, this is going to be, we might be some of the last people in the public to see this, because also it was totally off limits. We convinced an officer, Officer Cliff, let us in. We had name dropped that we had spent the day before with Mr. James Lavelle, who he obviously knew, or at least knew of. And so he took us down to the off-limits garage area where Jack Ruby shot Oswald, and he also took me into Lee Harvey Oswald's cell where he spent his last night, in the room where Mr. Lavelle interrogated Oswald until they made the Oswald Kennedy connection, and then they took him away from Mr. Lavelle until time for the transfer. So that would have been interesting. There's there's other stories I could have elaborated on, but didn't. But right now I'm going to focus on this book. So, but I hope people like it enough that they're interested in hearing other stories. Again, that would definitely branch out from, again, the presidents and the vice presidents, though, again, for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well,
people want to read about how, my dad and my friend Kelvis went to the the Christmas Story house, and Kelvis and I dressed up in pink bunny suits, so that's gonna be in there. Or we encountered fake Bonzo's grave, and we had to go back to retrieve a token, and it was a whole thing.
Well, I for one love the book, and as I said, everybody should go pick it up. To end here, I want to say a very special thanks to not only you, Kurt, but I want to say a very special thanks to your sister and your family, your parents, because they supported you throughout this whole journey that you went on, starting at a young age. And I think it's wonderful. Your parents did a wonderful job raising a pretty terrific person. So you're A-okay in my book, and I love your book. I want everybody to get this book. So it's interesting, it's informative, and it's funny. There's a lot of funny stuff in it. My one hope is, now I don't hope that any presidents, obviously pass away, but it eventually will happen. And when it does, maybe you and I can visit a presidential grave for the first time together at some point. That would be pretty cool. So we'll see what the future holds down the line. But Kurt, thank you so much for doing this. Before we sign off, please tell everybody where they can find you, social media, website, where they can order the book, all of it. Let us have it.
Are we picking a most interesting question?
Yeah, so let's do that before you go over your stuff. What was the most interesting one for you?
I would say the one about people who I've met who have since passed away, whose graves I've been to.
Love it. That's Andy Chandler. So Andy, congratulations. You're going to receive an autographed copy of Kurt's book, courtesy of Kurt, of course, and myself here at Dead History. And I, of course, Kurt and I are going to work it out where we're going to pick a few other winners of just non-autographed copies of the book that we'll send out, and we'll contact those people. You probably some subscribers or followers of Kurt's on Instagram. We'll pick out a few people that we can send the book to. So it'll be pretty cool. But Kurt, tell us where people can go order this book and receive an autographed copy from you, and follow you on all social media and websites and such. Give it to us.
So first, to get it out of the way more briefly, on Instagram, it's KD Grave Hunter. On YouTube, my account name is Kurt Deion. So I'm starting to upload there a little bit more. And my intent is to go back again, like I said, and upload some more of those old home videos of, 10, 11-year-old me, 9-year-old me going to these places, and my sister throwing a fit. She'll love that now. My dad actually included one of those in the trailer. The trailer, which you can go see at presidentialgravehunter.com and on my YouTube channel. That was 100%. I gave my dad pretty much carte blanche on that. So if you want to see some visuals that go with the book, if you're somehow not convinced to go buy it, you can go to presidentialgravehunter.com, see the book trailer. There's also reviews there from established presidential related authors or other writers. Steve Buckley of The Athletic who's also actually I met at President Millard Fillmore's grave.
Yep.
And Joe Fakosh visiting the president's podcast. So I've gotten some nice, wonderful reviews so far. So if you want to read those, and then that's where you can also find links to purchase the book. If you want via PayPal, submit a purchase, I'll personalize a book to you. You can also buy it through, of course, your big stores like Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Rich Wilhelm was a connection of mine. He bought his from his local independent bookstore. So you can also, just go through their websites and they can order it too from there. And then there's the ebook version that you can also buy. I have a link to it on presidentialgravehunter.com too. And so that's available on, again, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, places like that.
Yep. Awesome. And one other thing, I want you to mention, if you don't mind, you're going to be doing a book signing down at the Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C., correct? Why don't you tell us the date of that?
All right. So I have 2 book signing dates set in stone right now. Looks like I'm going to have 3, maybe try to get a couple more. So it's not being advertised yet, but I can say it's pretty much locked in that I'll be having a book signing at North Burial Ground in Providence, Rhode Island, about 6 p.m. on Wednesday, June 28th. We were trying to figure out a date somewhat close to July 4th, but, not too far away. But as a presidential connection, I said, James Madison died on June 28th. So that's what we're going with. And so June 28th, North Burial Ground, Providence. I might have a Rhode Island one prior to that as well, but I can't reveal that yet. I haven't locked it in, even though that would be the first. And then July 2nd, it's a Sunday, I'll be at Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C., 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. The advertisement, the event link for that just got put up on the Congressional Cemetery page today. So I'm very pleased about that. That is the cemetery where Vice President Elbridge Gerry is interred. And so there'll be a book signing, meet and greet, and then also the public programs director, AJ Orlikoff, he and I are going to go around. It's going to be primarily led by him. I'll throw in different commentary. We're going to go to different graves related to presidential and vice presidential, people and sites and,
awesome.
The offices.
Yeah.
So probably like Belva Lockwood, one of the first women to run for president in the 1800s.
Yeah.
Tobias Lear is Washington's secretary. He's buried right by Gerry, and some graves like that. So
that's awesome.
And that's a cemetery. It's my favorite cemetery. You can bring your dog there too. If you're not a member, it's a $15 day pass. But
yeah,
it's America's hippest cemetery, which I'll also talk about in my guest commentary tomorrow in the POTUS notice teaser.
Yes.
By Heather Rogers. So that'll be emailed out if you've signed up for her POTUS notice.
Which you should, because it's awesome. Definitely go do that, everyone.
The presidential doodler.
Yeah. So great stuff, guys. Go follow Kurt. Go pick up the book, Presidential Grave Hunter. It's phenomenal. Kurt did a wonderful job. Again, Kurt, thank you so very much. The last thing that I want to end with, I saw somebody comment over here on the side. As far as my channel, Dead History, of course, here on YouTube. Tomorrow, the return of the Declaration of Independence Signers series.
Long time coming.
Part 1 of William Peka is coming tomorrow. Part 2 will be released on Sunday. And next week, 2 new videos will be to follow. And I am starting to conjure up the idea of eventually, maybe in a month or so, there needs to be another Dead History Trivia Night. So we will figure all that out as the time gets closer. So thank you, Kurt. Thank you so much, everybody. Again, go pick up the book. It's wonderful. I can't thank you enough for doing this, Kurt. I had a blast. And that's it, guys. Signing off for now. Thanks so much.
Thank you, TJ, and thank you, everybody.
Of course. Bye-bye now.